And Thomas, please start.
Okay, great. Let's get the party started, guys. Thanks for joining us. Good morning. Good morning. My name is Tom Nguyen, and I'm the Chief Global Markets Officer for SSI Securities. We are the dominant securities firm here in Vietnam, and we're always glad to be pulling together great minds for these types of events. What's interesting is that as I was thinking about this webinar today, every webinar that we've done, I always say it's my favorite, and I always say the dream team. This time I really mean it. This one is my favorite, and this one is the dream team because it's interesting. We sometimes wonder, if SSI can up our game in terms of the type of guests that we have in our discussions. And I could not be more proud of the group that we have today. We certainly Today we have a guest from Morgan Stanley, Pankaj Matani. He is head of platform sales and index strategy. Did I get that right, Pankaj? I didn't mess that up, did I? But very honored to have you here. Obviously, we don't have to explain much about Morgan Stanley, one of the great global firms on Wall Street. And interestingly, there's history here because Shen is that right?
Yeah,
And so there's quite a bit of history. So in many ways, SSI is bringing the band back together and then having a great discussion. Our chief economist, Anh Hung, I would say that Anh Hung is absolutely the best chief economist in Vietnam. And so when I returned to Vietnam a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years ago, there was a heavy blanket on our markets. If you can recall, our listeners, that we, about a year and a half, 2 years ago, the blanket on our market was, we were going through a tremendous leadership change. There was a lot of question, sort of, what does all that mean to the country, to the markets? There was a lot of concern about the real estate market, and what that really means, and how structural that was. And then don't forget, just a year and a half and 2 years ago, our market seemed like it was stuck at 1200. Okay, at 1200. And by the way, it was stuck around 1200 for years. I left Vietnam in 2009 after my stint with Deutsche Bank here, and the market was around 1200. I come back 2023, 2024-ish, and it was still 1200. Well, we fast forward today, boys, and here we are, 1600. People, we're taking it all for granted. It's breaking new highs every day. So I really want that to be the context. We have to put our comments into that context and also think about how sustainable is this? Is this time different? Okay. So let me start with Mr. Pankaj first, and pick on you first. Okay, sir. You put out an amazing note, really highlighting to the world that for the first time in history, Vietnam's trading volume was the highest in Southeast Asia. That note got so much attention, Pankaj.
Thank you, Tom, for the introduction. I am Pankaj Mathani from Morgan Stanley. I lead platform sales and index rebalance strategy for Asia. I'm based in Hong Kong. Please note that I'm not part of the equity research department, so all the views expressed here are my personal opinion. So in terms of my platform sales roles, I would say it's a centralized sales desk supporting high touch and low touch trading. Broadly speaking, as you may be aware, high touch trading involves about more personalized, relationship-based execution, while low touch trading is more automated and speed focused. A key part of this role is to keep clients involved in terms of regulatory development, exchange rule changes, and other factors that can impact trading activity and volumes. I also cover market access and capital liberalization, which particularly is relevant for Vietnam, as you know, which is undergoing significant transformation. In parallel, I also focus on index rebalance strategy. As you know, passive funds track global indexes, not just passive, but also even active, closely monitor index changes. And that AUM for passive involves analyzing and advising clients on index rebalance. Vietnam is the focal point here. As you know, it's up for potential upgrade to emerging market status, which could trigger pretty substantial flows in the country. Coming back to the note itself, Tom, we thought it was important to highlight in the context of what's happening in Asia. Vietnam's turnover, just to give you some stats, in July was $1.4 billion. Sorry, I'm not able to convert this to $2 billion. And Vietnam used to trade about $700 million in 2024 on a more average basis. So firstly, it's important to recognize and accept the fact that the turnover is now the highest in ASEAN. Right? If you look at number of stocks which trade above $5 million, which is generally a key threshold for a lot of investors, there are about 70 stocks in Vietnam which trade more than $5 million. Whereas if you compare it with some of the other ASEAN markets, that number is close to about 50 to 55, depending on which market you're referring to. So I think hence it was very important to highlight those important factual stats and the relevance of Vietnam in context of the volumes as well.
If I could just ask you, just so I understand a little bit in terms of your priorities. Obviously when you speak to an audience like us and like me, I'm all about Vietnam. But when you say that you're, head of Asian platform sales and index strategy, right, like in your universe, where does Vietnam sit in all that? That's my first question, so that we can kind of understand your priorities here. And then secondly, the data that you're looking, is there any way that you can gauge how sustainable it is? I know it's a really hard question.
Divide countries into various buckets. Obviously, there are large markets like China, which trade multifolds in terms of billions of dollars, which are very relevant. I would say Hong Kong and other markets as well, other large EM markets. And then obviously, Vietnam is new in relation to being potentially be considered to be emerging market. So as a starting point, you would always see the benchmark in terms of volumes to be somewhat lower, but it's important, right? We have seen markets once they have gotten included in core indexes like FTSE and MSCI, you tend to see those index providers' views and classification changes are quite important, and we should monitor that and should keep a close eye. Obviously, foreign investors' feedback is also important. As you know, the main issue from a Vietnam point of view has been market access. And I would say the regulators and authorities have made significant kind of progress, but also have given a good kind of timeline on how this will evolve as well. So I think that's very encouraging, right? So I think that's a very important point.
That's a common theme I have for each one of you, is that, obviously we see the picture. Obviously, I love the data that you're sharing. I'm hoping to God, Pankaj, that given all of your experience, not only in your current role, but actually you are also a head of emerging market strategy. So you have a really fascinating background. When you look at what's happening in Vietnam, that you have a sense whether it's real or not, it's sustainable or not. Is there any commentary that you can put around that?
I think it's a step-by-step process. We look at the reform process. We go to investors. We check if this is real. We circle back with feedback. And I think this time is obviously, in my view, has been quite engaging across the globe in terms of interest.
Mm.
And I would say there is also a confluence in relation to what was happening from a global tariff point of view as well, where Vietnam became front and center as well, and which also led to an impact on volume. So I wouldn't say this is just related to market access. There's a confluence of factors which is driving some of this volumes, as you would know. So I think that's something which is worth noting.
Got it. I love that word, confluence, confluence of factors. I think that's an interesting that we'll pick back up. And Pankaj, I have so many questions for you, but I only have an hour, so I'm going to shift over to Shenyang, and I'm going to come back to you. Okay. So Shenyang, my friend, you guys put out a note. I don't even know what was the date on July 18th or something. I thought it was a fantastic note. I think that anybody who's watching Vietnam should pick that note up and read it. And so could you just sort of, Shanyong, let's start with first of all your role. You are head of Southeast Asian research. Is that right, my friend? And
Yep.
so please share with our audience where you put Vietnam in this spectrum, number one. And then number two, summarize what you think are the most important elements of that note because it really captured my attention and, of course, our firm's attention. We do amazing research on Hung's team, but I think even Hung probably would think that research note was very punchy and, frankly, very on point. So, with that, Shen Yong, I'll hand it over to you. Yeah.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Yeah, thank you for having us. I'm Sheng Yong. Yeah, I head out Southeast Asian research, CICC. Just just we are pretty much a young team. Now first time that we are actually trying to explore into adding research products and capabilities into CICC's repertoire from a Southeast Asian standpoint. So we're about 3 to 4 years old. And so what we're trying to do is just to answer the first part of Tom's question. So we're trying to cover out and explore Southeast Asia for investors and for Chinese investors, for global investors as well. Just to put perspective into where Vietnam sits into all of this, it is the only frontier capital markets, classified frontier capital markets in Southeast Asia. And there are 6 of them. Singapore is the only developed markets, and the rest of them are emerging markets. But actually, I like what Tom mentioned on LinkedIn. Like he has upgraded Vietnam to emerging markets. So I guess we have 5 emerging markets and 1 developed markets. I correct myself on my original statement.
Yeah, Shen Young, nobody listens to me on LinkedIn. I have no credibility. So please downgrade us again.
Yeah. So back to this is yeah, it is important. I would see this every time somebody looks at Southeast Asia, they say size matters, right? And so they look at Indonesia for a start. But I guess from Pankaj original statement, like if size matters, then the amount of trading matters as well. So I would put Vietnam right up there alongside Indonesia in terms of importance and what's critical to the future development of Southeast Asia as well in terms of economic. Let me move back to the report. Thank you for the accolades and the recognition. It means a lot to us, to our team, that our friends in Vietnam actually rate our views in terms of Vietnam highly. We do always remember that we are outsiders looking into Vietnam, but we are bullish. I think for the first time in 15 years, just going into that note, we noted the highest GDP growth ever in 15 years, 8% on a year-on-year basis. I was just doing our team was just looking into the rest of the numbers globally. I think it's one of the fastest in the world. Not only just in frontier markets or emerging markets, is one of the fastest in the world. And I say emerging markets with a note there, given that it was upgraded or downgraded, or let's call it right in the middle. I think it's driven. A lot of it is driven by retail, which was close to up 15%. In terms of growth, driven really by tourism. We see real estate coming back. We see credit growth driving all of this, which was what Tom was quite worried about when he first arrived back in Ho Chi Minh. I think things are back alongside the markets. I think trade exports are maybe a bit to do with front loading. stuff like that. But I guess these are things that we are looking out for, whether in terms of sustainability, in terms of anything coming forward. Just to give color into the entire report, it's a two-pronged thing that we see in Vietnam. We first touch on tariffs. Just some of the stuff that I guess everyone's been tracking on the media altogether. I think the speed in terms of Vietnam, closing a deal with USA, with America, with Donald Trump, let's call it that way, has actually put Vietnam in the spotlight in terms of the speed, in terms of the response, in terms of the velocity, in terms of how quickly they are able to actually close something. So thereafter, you see the rest of I'll call it Vietnam's competitors or neighbors, or we like to put it that way, coming in at about 19% in terms of tariffs, right? Vietnam's at 20%. I really do not think, we really do not think that that's going to make any difference to Vietnam's fundamentals altogether. I think we think that just the whole idea of the entire supply chain in Vietnam, I'll call it 10 years. It's been 10 years, or even more than 10 years, where supply chains have been setting up shop in Vietnam. I think this is for 1% tariffs. We honestly do not think anybody's going to be moving away to our neighbors or to our competitors altogether, which actually gives us a lot of confidence that this is here to stay for a while, and this could be Vietnam's next 5-10 years in terms of what we call it, the Doi Moi 2, right? And this is and coming back into Doi Moi 2, I think it's also what we think it's what we see upon the domestic transitions. I think the domestic transition from a 3-tier administrative structure to a 2-tier administrative structure, which started 1st of July. Correct me if I'm wrong. So from here, we are looking at 63 provinces to 34 provinces, 10,000 commune level admin units to 3,300 units. Just 2 million people in the government down to 1.5 million people. I think these are the kind of changes that we want to see in any administration. Because it's cutting down on red tape, there's cutting down on bureaucracy. We are going straight to where we want to be, where it is good for the country in terms of economy. There are 4 resolutions we specifically spoke about, we wrote about in terms of our entire report. Resolution 57, 59, 66, 68. I think let's just go directly into the legal reforms, which really impressed a lot of us out here. We see resolve in wanting to not only just say that, hey, administratively, let's just cut that down. We see legal reforms trying to level the playing field for foreigners. We want to have a legal system for investments and businesses by 2028. Updates for governance by 2027. I think the equal access to capital, land, and talent. All of this is just going to open up the markets for even more foreigners to come into Vietnam's economy altogether. I guess these all would probably play out really well for different sectors in terms of this resolution 66 and administrative streamlining, real estate, construction sectors, data centers, digital infrastructure. These are things that we like. And the other one that I like to call out, it's really the private economy, the empowerment of the private sector. Resolution 68. Trying to lift, all these enterprises all up to, 2 million enterprises by 2030, 3 million by 2045. These are the things that, again, you have your tax reductions, you have your SME financing, stuff like that, investments into research and development, R&D. These are things that which really puts us in a good position where we feel that, it's here to stay, and it's something that is sustainable. It's gonna propel Vietnam forward, and I don't know. I was just throwing it out there and see what we could actually be looking for Vietnam in the long run as well. So this has caught our attention. Yeah.
So look, I think a couple of things I hear from you and a question. Okay, I'll call it the 3 S's. Size matters, speed matters, and sustainability matters. Is that right?
Yeah.
I hope our compliance doesn't yell at me for this, okay? But by the way, Shen Yang brought it up, not me, so I'll blame that on you. So that's the first thing that comes to mind, and I'll call it the three S's moving forward. However, Shenyang, I have to challenge you, okay, on the tariff situation, because maybe this tells a little bit about my political standing. Most of the things that Donald Trump does, I think, is just fake news. Is that right? So I've been out there on my LinkedIn, as you were saying, fake tariffs, fake deals. I just think these tariffs are all fake, and I think every deal he announces is fake. And so at the end of the day, Shenyang, are we all going to figure out that all this was just noise? That the Donald was trying to make some noise and create tension, and we're going to kind of go back to where we were before. Certainly, markets are telling you around the world that we don't care. Is that right? Okay. So, what if this is all just fake and noise, Shenyang? How should I be thinking about Vietnam in this context?
Oh, great question, Tom. Let's put it this way: if all these tariffs were rewinded, Trump, Trump always chickens out, right? That's what they say. Taco, and so I guess wouldn't that put Vietnam back in the driver's seat all again? Tariffs are all gone. I mean, just to share, we actually see a lot more demand before this tariffs hoo-ha conundrum from Chinese investors, from the investors that we have actually we face. There was actually a lot more demand for Vietnam before these tariff hoo-ha. And with the tariffs hoo-ha, we see your friendly neighbors, your competitors actually getting a bit more attention. However, so in that hypothetical situation that you spoke about, then what would happen is that wouldn't all the demand go back and attention go back to Vietnam altogether? Bear in mind again, your supply chain is still there. There is a certain amount of deepening supply chain, a deep supply chain in Vietnam prior to this tariffs, and they were all looking for like, oh, what if Vietnam got hit by what 46, and everyone's like, oh, should we pivot? Should we go somewhere else? But I mean, for what's worth, let's put it this way: Donald Trump did Vietnam one good, right? Like it put Vietnam out in terms of closing the deal first, and yeah, everything's on the horizon. So great stuff for Vietnam.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that because I think I can't attribute myself for it because I don't know if I'm the first one that said it, but I think Donald Trump is making Vietnam great again. Is that right? In the sense that with all the noise and even throwing out 46 out there, I think I have so many friends in the US that never even thought about Vietnam other than coming to visit me and eating pho. Is that right? And now they're like, wow, you guys really actually make that much stuff to send to the US? And so we can thank Donald Trump, regardless if you like him or not. You can thank him for 1600 and where we are today. So Shen Yong, thank you for those opening comments. Let's pivot over to our great An Hung. An Hung, you've been listening to all this. You're truly the local expert on this in this room. Is that right? Even way beyond me. So I would love to just get your reactions, your thoughts, where you think our speakers could be right, where you think you might differ. So just I leave it to you and Hung to share and respond.
I think for me, yeah, I love the report on the Doi Moi 2.0. But for locally, I think the Doi Moi 1.0 is a little bit easier for Vietnam because by then, like when it happened, I was only like 10 years old, and I think it's simply like we try to shift from the planned economy to a more open one, to the Vietnamese version for the market economy. So, and by then, I think Vietnam is quite a small country, so it's easier for us to do the opening. But then by now, I think after a few decades, we have become a much bigger with bigger economy, and we got a deeper integration into the global economy. So I think by now the new reform, or we can call Doi Moi 2.0, is quite difficult for us in a number of sense. I think the good news is for what happening with the tariff. I do agree that suddenly we become a benchmark for everyone. Suddenly like 20% tariff become the thing that every country say, hey, we want lower tariff than Vietnam. I think is the good news. And another signal, like I don't know when Vietnam become India become the competitor for Vietnam. So people always ask about like, hey, India, they got like 20, 25 is a big problem for Vietnam. I don't know when, but we become much bigger one. So for me, I think uh yes,
By the way,
the
and Hung, and I want to throw this out at Shen Yong too. Is that really the right way of looking at it? Is India really competitive with Vietnam?
Uh,
I don't think so, but I think it does show the point that Vietnam now become a very big player in the global trade at the moment, and that make the Doi Moi 2.0 for us is
Hmm.
more important. And I think, of course, sometimes in Vietnam, I just add my point. Like previously, we think that the Vietnamese government they follow a gradualism approach to everything, like step by step, and it take a lot of time. But from last year, I think they changed the approach, like everything everywhere all at once, right? We do it like very fast because sometimes we need a very breakthrough push to the institutional reform so we can like not only catch up with um, other countries, but more importantly, I think the windows of opportunity for Vietnam is quite narrow before we become the population. So that's why we got like 10 or 15 years to go. So that's why we need to be quick that time. So that's what
Yeah,
happened here.
and Hung, I also want to have a follow-up question on this, and Shen Yong, feel free to jump in here. But like I focus on the capital markets, and clearly there are, behind the SSC's great effort, and Madam Fung, our chairwoman, has been spectacular in their efforts and focus in transforming our capital markets. And my guess is some of this has to do with, of course, our desire to be upgraded, the criteria. But I also think it's much bigger than that. It's, we're setting ourselves on a path to develop our capital markets with the FTSE upgrade potentially as a catalyst and as a sort of an interim target. Um, but as Pankaj mentioned, it's the confluence. Living here in Vietnam, experiencing Vietnam through the lens of SSI, I can tell you it feels like every part of this place is transforming, you know?
Mm.
And so as you're talking and Hung, I'm just wondering what was the key catalyst? What is the thing that brought this whole 100 million people, our leadership together and saying, okay, guys, it's time to move? Because I look at the world very narrowly. I'd love to hear from your perspective. Is this what's driving this confluence that's happening in Vietnam?
On the demographics that I said earlier, we got like 10 or 15 years before we become the age population. But the more important thing, like we want to play in catch up. And I think the for monetary policy or the money market, I think the room is quite limited for us. I think the credit per GDP in Vietnam is 140% of GDP, is a little bit too high, and a lot of financial sector risk here if we rely too much on the banking sector. And if we want like 10% GDP growth, the double digit growth like the government say, and if with the I core about like 4, it means the total investment here need to go like 14%, 40% year on year. And we cannot rely on banks solely. I think that's why we need to develop the capital market. And I think the size of the capital market in Vietnam is very small. At the moment, I think even we got like Van Gassel, we got like seven company with like 5 million trading per day. I think it's too small for us. I think we need to grow more, and that's why I think the Ministry of Finance and the government, they need to develop the capital market, and we already have the the initiative for the International Financial Center with a lot of like new initiative and sandbox mechanism to like do push almost everything here. And I think the legal reform is quite okay here in Vietnam in everything. I think like the law of investment is already on the table to be revised after only 1 year after they are revised. And I think they simplify the investment procedure is in the very great manners. Not only like invest for the foreign investor invest into Vietnam, but also for Vietnamese company to in there's a lot of initiative at the moment to develop the capital market here.
Got it, and got it. Okay, I'm going to hold you off here. I have more questions, and I know that the audience will want to hear your thoughts on directionally where the market's going and certain areas in the market that's attractive at this point. I'm going to go back to Pankaj. Pankaj, I don't see your camera on it. Are you still? Hi there, Mr. Handsome. So I know what's on people's minds here. I think the local investors are hearing a lot about the upgrade. And I think a lot of it generally is, and this is not a criticism, this is just a reality, is that it's just soundbite. Is that right? Vietnam's going to be upgraded to EM. It means it's a good thing and markets go up. I think the average investor here, that's all they think about. Is that right? So, Pankaj, where you could help us is help us understand based on your expertise, watching other markets included, get upgraded. How do markets generally behave? In terms of, is it that simple that we all hope that FTSE upgrades us, the market goes up, we become EM, and we're in heaven? All the action that's happening in the market right now, is it explainable to you? How do you view about the potential upgrade, and how should local investors, what should they expect in this process? If you could touch on any of that.
Yeah, absolutely. First thing to say that obviously we haven't seen in Asia a market upgrade for a long time. So it's good to see Vietnam coming up. Obviously, China is different in terms of size as a barrel. So it's difficult to put China side by side. But I would certainly say other markets, whether in EMEA or other parts of the world which have gotten upgrade, you tend to see volumes grow. Obviously, price action is important as well as participants expect flows to come into the market, whether it's passive or active. So just to give you some numbers, so the audience would resonate much better. If Vietnam were to be included in, let's say, FTSE or MSCI, just giving you rough numbers here, it would be still a small portion of the emerging market index, so it would be 0.3%. But as Hung mentioned, capital markets need to be developed. You'll have more companies. I'm sure this percentage can go higher in terms of the weighting. So that's the other aspect. And to your point, that's the forward. We're looking at things as it stands right now, but the forward is obviously you'll have more companies getting listed. You'll have more development in the capital market. That would lead to obviously a higher weight over time. And also price action is important. Once a country is potentially announced to be included, obviously in anticipation of the flows, you do see a lot of interest preempting this move. So generally, you would tend to see the market rise. And I would expect that's what the retail investors possibly are also looking at. But like I said, this time is a bit different as well because of I'm going to use this word again, the confluence of factors, because while you have the potential announcement for upgrade, you also had the tariff resolution, as Shen Yong mentioned in some form, right? at the same time. So very difficult to disassociate what's happened, what was the driver. But I would say certainly tariff was an important kind of driver. And you saw that as the news came out, the impact was obviously, you saw that on volumes as well. So there are two aspects to this, right, in terms of what we have seen right now. But the forward is, when markets do get upgraded, like I was mentioning, the volumes tends to rise and so does the price. If you were to ask me in terms of how much the volumes rise by, looking at parallels of other markets in EMEA, in Europe, I would say the volumes tend to grow from 1 to 3 times, right, of current. So that's obviously important because that will change volume profile. And like you said, sustainability is an important aspect to this, right? You need to see consistent reform process to go through to have these volumes over time as well and be sustainable. So that reform story doesn't end when the market is upgraded. It needs to continue over time. So yeah, I know I mentioned a couple of points, but that's how I see things currently and the way forward.
If I could ask just another couple of questions, market structure. You're focused on volume and direction, which is obviously very very important. And thanks for touching upon that. But I'm also fascinated. What's going to happen with this market in terms of institution versus retail? And as you know, sort of the rule of thumb in Vietnam, 10% institution, 90% retail. And then you also led off talking about high touch, low touch, you know, coming from, we're talking markets and hung, so don't smile so much, okay? Okay, so I come from the American market where I've seen these developments, market structure, and we went from high touch to now we're dominated by low touch. Is that right? And frankly, that has an impact on the brokers, the type of services we offer, the type of commission structure that's going to happen, and competition. So if you can touch upon market structure, assuming we do get upgraded, how do you anticipate that changes from institutional retail and then high touch, low touch? Yeah.
I think the institutional and retail aspect is quite important. I think all participants, market participants, are relevant to the capital markets.
Yes.
They bring a lot of flavor and breadth and quality in the right format. Obviously, one skew over another is not helpful. And I would say that a more institutional market would certainly be helpful, especially at times when there is a lot of exuberance, I would say, or animal spirits are high. You need the institutions to kind of come in and bring price in parity. So I would say market participants, a mix of market participants is quite important. Each market participant brings their own strength to the market. For example, when the markets are falling, when global markets are falling, retail investors step in and buy the market, right? So, and somewhat of a domestic institution sometimes as well. So I would say market participant mix is extremely important. It should not be skewed to in one direction.
Is that and over time, based on what you see in other markets, and I know every market is different and every market is similar, but where do you think we settle in? Let's assume that Vietnam continues its developmental path. In the long term, where do you see that mix going from 90-10 to where?
Obviously, it will be a slow process, and it also depends on the market upgrades. So if FTSE were to upgrade, if MSCI were to upgrade, obviously there's a lot of passive following and active following in emerging markets, right? The AUM associated with emerging market funds is quite large. So that itself should lead to a kind of percentage.
Yeah, institutional.
Yes, correct. Especially foreign institutionalization. And then domestic institutionalization is also important, which I'm sure as Vietnam moves along, you will see that happen as well over time. So don't expect like this 10 to suddenly skew towards 90-10 on the other side. It won't happen. I think the best course of action is it moves in the right direction and kind of stabilizes where other kind of key markets are at. And other key markets have different aspects to it as well. So there's no right or wrong answer to this, but it certainly at this stage looks a bit skewed.
Yeah, and Pankaj, before you go to the high touch, low touch commentary, I have to say to you that sitting at SSI, we are absolutely seeing the market moving in the right direction. You know, this 90-10 is probably slightly outdated. I would say it's probably 85, 85-15 at this point, roughly. I would guess that our competitors are seeing that. So to your sort of commentary, Vietnam is absolutely moving in the right direction as we approach the potential upgrade. And then let's go to high touch, low touch.
Yeah, I mean, that aspect, obviously, I'll be quite brief here. Obviously, there's been a lot of systematic flows to markets globally, and it's kind of been a benefit in terms of liquidity providers as well. So I think you obviously have seen low touch kind of increase over time as we have seen that trend continue. This is not just in your market, but also just globally. So that trend is ongoing. And obviously, again, there are aspects to both channels, and both are continued to stay. It's just we have seen algos and automation drive that low touch trend in markets.
Got it. Got it. And before I transition back to our other speakers, if I could just make a plug for SSI, the reality is that we, I always say that we're the dominant broker in Vietnam. Why do I say that? I say that because we are dominant both in institution and retail. And even our friends at CICC, given your amazing history, was really focused on institution only. But over time, I think CICC recognized to truly be successful and helpful to global clients, you had to have the significant reach into the local retail market. So, gosh, what you're saying, in my view, is really insightful because oftentimes I think people talk about institution and retail as like two separate, almost competing. But the reality is, for a healthy market, you have to have both of them, and they actually have to be joined. I have to say here, sitting in Vietnam, our retailers wants to know what the institutions are doing, and the institution guys wants to know what the retail guys are thinking. So we are lucky at SSI where we are dominant in both areas, and that's why I think, well, we're the best. Anyway, with that, I'm going to move back over to Shen Young. Okay, so Shen Young, what's on my mind a little bit? I don't even know if you can answer this. How does China see all this? I mean, to the capacity that you can answer, how does China really view what's happening out of the US? But perhaps more importantly, how does China view Vietnam? Are we just that cute neighboring country that is cute most of the time, annoying sometime? Are we a strategic partner? Give us some perspective on that, Shen Young.
Yeah, I think I'm going to answer this from a Southeast Asia perspective rather than just from a Vietnam perspective, because I think generally it's the same line of thought. I like the two words that you brought up, strategic partnerships. I think this is from a geographical standpoint, it is something that we'll never be able to change. It's set in stone, right? I mean, unless we try to do something differently tomorrow. But yeah, so I guess what we're looking for is market access. We're looking at China is now one of the largest FDI into Southeast Asia. Also in terms of export and import and trade, China has also become the largest exporter into Southeast Asia. I think most Southeast Asian countries have the largest import trade partner as actually China. So I think what we are seeing is an integration of economies. I think this is something that's critical to both region and China as well. I think these are things that we should be looking out in terms of what we should be looking for in terms of development, um, in terms of growing together, in terms of education, exchange of technology. I'll just put it on 2 points, like exchange of technology. I'm not sure if everybody has actually seen this. I think King D just signed something with FPT in Vietnam. I think this is something that we will be able to see going forward. Exchange of technology, use of Chinese technology all over Southeast Asia. I think this bodes really well. I think this is something that we should be looking for. And in terms of education altogether, I think that this is something, it's very interlinked in terms of the best practices, in terms of just in terms of education structure and business models. These are things that I think we will share in terms of both China and the region. So that's how I look upon how we think that Southeast Asia and China will look in terms of long-term development. Yeah.
Yeah, so if you don't mind me being really direct and honest here, okay? So in a sense that I sitting here in Vietnam, we're neighbors. We have an incredible history together. We're quite intertwined in many ways. But why don't I see more Chinese flow like into like like to me, if China just gave us the crumbs of the crumbs of the crumbs of your flow, whatever that means, you would move this market would be 2000, is that right? I mean, having had that experience sitting in the US. And so I'm just quite surprised that I do see we have a lot of Chinese visitors, very thoughtful questions, very smart. But then I just find that unless it's happening away from me and I'm not aware of it, I just find that why isn't China all over us and really taking great investments in this great opportunity that we have here? Or am I missing something here?
I think that's a good point. For a start, you mentioned 1910, eh? So that's historical. So 10% institutions, it takes some time for things to actually change. I think we're seeing a growing amount of flows. It will definitely be, but it takes time because like investors Chinese investors, mainland investors need to learn about what's happening in Vietnam. Being cautious altogether, trying to understand what's happening altogether. So as like the Pankaj mentioned, like 1 to 3x of what it used to be. After emerging markets upgrade, possible 1 to 3x. Just bang on that fact that if we are going from even if we are going at 90-10 in terms of instis to retail 1 to 3x, we are actually possibly tripling the amount of institutions participation. And if we go to 80-20, we're actually 5x or 6x of what it used to be. So I think that's also what we should also be thinking in terms of what's happened. Just to come back to all of this is like some of these Chinese companies have actually appeared in China, in Vietnam already for the past 10 to 15 years. It takes some of these brands to actually come into Vietnam to learn about it. These companies, they go back to China, they talk about it, and then that's when probably we'll see a lot more investors coming in as well, to partake in the entire capital markets growth together. Yeah, so I think that's how I'm learning. Bringing the good story back to to the country, to everybody, to their friends, telling them what's happening, and the investors come in. That's where CICC plays our part to actually help educate, bridge, working with SSI in terms of introducing the entire Vietnam story to every Chinese investor out there. So I mean that's what we intend to do, and that's what we are here to do. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What sectors do you think, looking through the lens of China, do you think is particularly most interesting to the to China?
I think a few things. There are similarities in terms of the GDP, the economy, in terms of banking, in terms of real estate. We've been through that. There are also like positives in terms of manufacturing. However, that's the first question we literally get on every basis. Is like, hey, how can we play in that sector in terms of manufacturing, in terms of supply chain shifts, and the first thing that comes to our mind is like, we look around and we go like maybe the industrial parks, and because there isn't any specific names that you could actually go into. So however, we think about what could actually happen post supply chain shifts, post like manufacturing growth. It's actually consumer. We think 60%, at least close to 60% of the economy is from consumer consumption. We like the local consumption plays. These are sectors that we actually think could benefit, especially in terms of like the empowerment of the private sector. We see retail, we see tourism, we see healthcare possibly benefiting from this entire privatization. Push for POEs in Vietnam altogether. For sure, these are things that we will focus on. But looking back into what's happened in the past month and a half, I think what we're seeing is actually your banks benefiting a lot more, your banking sector benefiting a lot more, and SSI as well. I think it's actually punched through the roof, right?
I'm sorry, I haven't noticed, but thanks for letting me know, Shen. I'll check after this call. So, hey, Pankaj, I don't know, Pankaj, is he still? Quick question, on the upgrade, obviously you guys know the consensus the market is expecting FTSE to have to upgrade us in their next meeting, which is in September, announcement early October. I want to be very careful about that because that's the consensus. And I think, Hung, I think that's our house view too, okay? Coming from being a very old man, coming from different markets, one of my favorite sayings in this business is that the consensus is always wrong. Okay. There's nuances around that. So I hope our listeners don't just take that as a headline. There's nuances around that. So it does worry me that we all assume that FTSE is going to upgrade us in September. But then in my heart of hearts, when I look at what's really happening in this country, I'm thinking to myself, we're already upgraded. Like, so Pankaj, help me understand how you look at this thing. And you may not be able to want to answer this question or are able to answer this question, but do you fall in line with consensus based on what you're seeing? How do you view the potential upgrade coming up?
Yeah, I think as you know, the progress is real, right? We can see that whether it's in relation to the non-pre-funding solution, which is the temporary solution at this stage. Obviously, the permanent solution is the CCP.
Yep.
Obviously, that's the big thing. But I would say the direction is absolutely the right direction. So even though whether it's this September or that's next March or the following year, I think the direction is quite important. The direction is absolutely in the right direction. And I think that matters a lot more. We haven't discussed MSCI as well, right? There's a lot of following on MSCI side as well. So I must kind of mention this, that rather than picking a date, I think what's important here is the direction of travel is positive and there's meaningful changes happening. So obviously we started in Vietnam to see progress on the non-pre-funding take up. That's been now at a high level.
Yep.
Obviously, not there's not broad participation, but it is certainly at a level which is high. I would also say that the KRX implementation on the trading system was quite positive. Obviously, there was a hiccup last year in relation to the implementation. So this tells you what the timeline was provided was executed by the regulators and by the authorities. And that's, to your point, sustainability, direction of travel is much more important. So if it doesn't happen in September and October, obviously there'll be disappointment. But I would say people who are looking at more seriously in terms of Vietnam, more strategically, are looking at how this is evolving over time, and that's the right direction in my view. So that's what I would say. I know a lot of people are kind of hooked on this date and made this consensus, but I think that's certainly important. If there will be a disappointment, obviously it will be a disappointment, but I think to what you mentioned and what the other speakers have also mentioned, that the direction of travel is absolutely in the right way.
Thank you, Pankaj. I will amplify that because I think, look, and I'm sure FTSE is probably listening in on this, and the reality is, I think FTSE knows very clearly that, from an investor's perspective, from somebody sitting at Morgan Stanley, from offshore investors, long-term investors, the type that we want. Truth be told, it doesn't make a difference whether it's this September or March. Is that right? It really doesn't make a difference. It is very meaningful for our country. It's very meaningful for the SSC and all that stuff, because there's been so much work. The direction is real. The improvements are real. So we all get that, but we also recognize that from a global investor's perspective, it probably doesn't make that big of a difference whether it's this September or March. By the way, I know nothing. I'm still in the consensus of hoping, wishing, dreaming, staying up at night, waiting for September to happen. But I just wanted to just ask you that question. So look, we are running out of time. And Hung,
Yes.
if you could just give us, give the listeners a perspective on very briefly on where you think this market is going, and just a couple of areas that you see of value in the market, and then I'll make closing comments.
Yes, for me, I think the reform will continue, and the upgrade is that the outcome, not the ultimate target for us. So previously, I think the reform is like we try to like we opening the door, telling people like here's a list that you can do and here's a list you cannot do. But at the moment, I think the reform here is about we try not just opening the door, but we renovate the house, upgrade the house, building some layer on that to and not just the opportunity in the equity market, but also for the fixed income one, because not only like got the FTSE upgrade, but on MSCI, and also for the sovereign rating of the Vietnam to be upgraded. So the fixed income market should be like very attracting in Vietnam at the moment, because you can see in the emerging market, the bond index is the AUM is very big. So Vietnam, with a lot of investment into infrastructures, we need that. And a lot of our neighbors like Thailand or Malaysia or the Philippines, they are in the bond index. So why not Vietnam in that for financing our economy? So I think like for we talk about risk a bit, because maybe Sen Young want to hear about the local risk. I
Yes.
think like with a lot of reform, people think about institutional here, because when we streamlining the government, I think we got less people but more job, so a little bit overload here. So that's what when the public and private partnership is coming in, when here the government they try to promote things like the partnership between the private and the public sector, and that's when we a lot of people like us could help the government in a number of things, so we can work together to resolve some of the overload here for the institutional. And for the sector we focus on, I think because Vietnam is a latecomer, so normally we can talk about like financial sector of consumer, but I think this is the asset is the one that the government here they want to take it on because I think it's a new thing with a latecomer in terms of trying to be playing catch up. So maybe it's more interesting because everybody new to the digital access. So with the pilot resolution from the government that they will introduce soon, maybe next month or October, I think it's when people should have a look on. So back to you, Thomas.
Great, great. Well, let me just, first of all, thank our panelists. It's always a gift to have just incredible minds, experience on these calls for us, and I never take it for granted, even though I tease you guys a little bit. This is just a dream for me to be able to have a conversation with, Pankaj sitting at Morgan Stanley and Shen Yong at CICC, and of course our chief economist. I'll close with a couple of thoughts. The first thought is the reason I love working in Vietnam today is because there's an incredible information gap. And what I mean by that is offshore investors, offshore market participants, even though you guys are amazing, the point I want to make is that you guys don't just focus on Vietnam. Pankaj and Shenyang, the moment you sign off on this call, you're going to be focused on China, India, Japan, Indonesia, maybe even Laos. Is that right, Shenyang? Who knows what you do? But the truth is offshore investors, as much as Vietnam is exciting, there's an information gap because you guys have to focus on many other markets, many other factors, many other priorities. And then, of course, onshore investors who are expert on Vietnam don't see some of the data that you can provide. Pankaj, the way you look at it, Shen Yong, the way you look at it through the lens of sitting in China. So that's where it's amazing to sit at a firm like SSI, where our hope, and I think even our competitors, hope is to step in and help close that gap, okay, in terms of just knowledge gap and do these type of things. The other thing that in closing comments is there's so much talk about the upgrade, and I too am hoping. I love FTSE, by the way, if you're listening. But the truth is, I think what I love about living and watching and seeing in Vietnam, and Pankaj, you hit a lot about this, is that in some ways the change, the progress, the development is real, that we've already upgraded ourselves, and if I can even quote our friends over at BlackRock, they basically say, look, if you guys want to be EM, you need to start looking, smelling, walking like an EM market. And so when I see data points from Pankaj coming out, I see comments from Shen Yong comparing us to other markets, I'm like, okay, whether or not FTSE upgrades us this September or not, we're already upgrade. We're already behaving like an EM market, and it doesn't stop there. Is that right? If you are as close to the development of this country as we are with the SSC and the MOF, you realize that this is more than just FTSE upgrade. This is the confluence, the will of a country to develop. And that's why it's awesome to be sitting and working in Vietnam and at SSI. So with that, thank you. I love our panelists. You guys are the dream team. I really mean it this time, okay? And thank you for your contributions. And thank you all of our listeners for dialing in. Cheers.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.